All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the time of year where folks start to get a little nervous about the final report, even though some of you have barely started meeting. I mean, as expected, right? You've maybe had 1 or 2 meetings, but it's never too early to start thinking about this. And so we thought it would be a good time to just check in and let folks know where, give a little preview of what we're hoping for with the final reflection. So let's see. I'm going to share my screen. So I thought it would be very helpful, hopefully, to start with reminding us of why we're doing this in the first place. So the purpose of these FLCs is, our hope is to foster an environment of sustained, meaningful conversations about teaching and learning with supportive colleagues. So it's 3 parts, right? We want you to talk about teaching and learning with your colleagues. And what we ask you to do is make a change in your course, talk about it with your colleagues, and write about it. So these second 2 points I think of as different forms of reflection. So hopefully when we look at Schoen and Dewey and Kolb, theorists about reflection, they talk about it as a cycle. So when we think about an FLC, these are repeated meetings where you talk about a change, you make a change, you make a plan for a change, and you're constantly talking about it with your colleagues. And that's one form of reflection. But the other form of reflection is that what we're talking about today, that's the write about it part. And I love this quote from Dewey, that reflection converts action that is merely appetitive, blind, and impulsive into intelligent action. So that's what we're all about, right? Intelligent action. So the questions, and actually, let me quickly put in the chat as a reminder, where's the chat? The link to the toolkit, which includes all of these prompts. So this was in the email I sent, but also I just put it in the chat. So this has all of the reflective prompts, and it also has 3 examples of final reflections. So when we're thinking about the reflection that you're going to be writing, it's kind of 4 different parts. The first part is to tell us about the original assignment or activity or course material that you are changing. Now, it could be that if it's a new one, then this part will be a little different, and that's great if you're doing something completely new. But we just want you to tell us about it and what the purpose of it was. The next part is to talk about the change. So what change did you make? Why did you make it? What was the purpose of it, of making that change? And then tell us about whether or not it worked. So the whether or not it worked could be data that you collect from your students. It could be test scores or grades. But we want to think more about the qualitative part of it too. Like, what did you notice? What were the students doing differently? What were they saying? Things like that. It sort of paints a picture more than just numbers do. The third part is to talk about the outcome for your students, and then to think about what you would do differently next time. So, pretty much every time we teach something, especially when we're teaching something new or doing something different for the first time, we learn from it, right? So we think, okay, that went great, and this part not so great. What will I do differently next time to make it a more successful learning experience? And then the final part, and this is for us and for you. What effect did your participation in this FLC have on your teaching? So really this whole reflective process, we want to know about your experience in the FLC. But really what we know about reflection is that sitting down to write about this, to think about this, it helps you understand how your participation in the FLC affected your teaching, how these conversations with colleagues changed you as a teacher in some way. As Jeff said, or as I guess as I said, in the link there at the end of the toolkit, there are 3 examples of final reports, and they each look a little differently. Let me just share that with you. But again, you can go to that link. So here's the toolkit with the purpose, task, and criteria of the FLC. Those of you who are fans of Tilt will be familiar with this layout here with purpose, task, and criteria. And then there's examples of 3 critical reflections from previous CLSs, and they look different. One literally just takes each question in turn right here, of the 6 prompts that I just showed you, and that's fine. Others did it in narrative form, also great. We just want to give you the opportunity to think about this experience and how it has changed your teaching. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff because he has spent a lot of time this past week or 2 looking at final reports from the last 2 years.
Okay. Am I muted or on? I'm unmuted. Good. Okay. Denise, have you stopped sharing screen? Okay, good. All right. So the law of unintended consequences plays a part in this program, just like it does in everything else. What Denise gave you is a wonderful model for the segments of the reflection, the CLS frame, and then the parts of that, the original assignment, the idea, the pedagogy, the application. So what I want to do is go over that with a mention of the resources that we've posted, and then give you an example from the time of COVID, when COVID made us, and it is still doing that, is making us revise, rethink, revisit what we're actually trying to do here. So let me see. First, the frame. Okay. Let's see. You should be seeing a PowerPoint. Is that right? Okay. On the left are the pedagogies that we've had as topics for the first 2 years. And we've invited everyone to consider these along with the 2, as you'll see in a second, the 2 primary umbrella topics for this year. What I wanted to note, this is something that I shared back in September. Most of the CLSs have selected 1 or some blend of 2, and there's another possibility that many have opted for, and that's an institution-specific topic that seemed to meet a need of your college. Each of these represent evidence-based practices, transparency, course design, high-impact practices, inclusive pedagogies across the disciplines. Small teaching is another name for interactive strategies, making a small change. So these and the 3 outcomes that we've designed for the course are the intellectual or pedagogical frames. And this year, back in September, we had said, consider, due to COVID and the influence of the shift from face-to-face to online, and then now moving back toward some face-to-face, hybrid perhaps. So those 2 topics, hybrid HIPs and best practices for hybrid teaching. The focus on USG support, the webinars that we offered in the summer and in the fall, let me see if I can return to in the fall, what are you seeing now? The PowerPoint or a Word doc?
The PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint still? Okay, then I need to. Oh boy. Let's see. See if this will work.
I did it.
Yay! You're talking about learning to move from Zoom to Teams and back. I'm having a hard time doing any of the first things. So, all right. So in the fall, when we began in the summer, when we began to offer the summer webinars and the fall webinars, a lot of the focus was on hybrid. And so I just wanted, before I go over this example of a really good final report, I want to just invite everyone to consider going back, whether your topic is clear, whether you've met 6 or 8 times, or you're just beginning. The resources that Denise and team, the webinar teams, have gathered on the OFD pages are really fantastic. This morning I was looking at a presentation that Shannon Brooks and Chase Haygood had presented on hybrid HIPs. I was reviewing because this is one of the topics for this year. The second presentation, the second PowerPoint that they offered is really fantastic for creating service learning courses in the online and hybrid environment. So those resources that we posted on the OFD page can really supplement what you are doing, no matter the topic. It will help strengthen the conversation and the resources, and I think ultimately the reports. Okay, so this is an example of, gosh, Denise mentioned, I've been looking at more than 200 reports over the last 2 weeks because we're finalizing the manuscript for the first of 2 books. And what I've noticed in the reports is the flexibility of the form and the flexibility of the process. So in this one, the CLS scholar was focusing on her theater class, 3403 play analysis, and her original plan, as she writes in this reflection. This is part of the CLS report from one of the groups at Kennesaw State. As she writes in the report, the original assignment was she had planned to tilt a costume design assignment. It's one of the final homework assignments for this spring class. And as part of her planning, she began to think, we were talking about transparency in learning and teaching, that may play into 3 or 4 other aspects of this theater and performance studies class. So I know you can't see this, it's probably too small, but in addition to the plan for tilting a costume design assignment, she began to revise exercises along the way. And there are 3 bullets there where she planned to focus on transparency and its relation to growth mindset. And then COVID happened. So this is like 5 weeks into the class. Then COVID happened. And in her second bullet, she begins to say, I thought it was all going to crash. I thought it was all going to end. And then she realized that by making a change from simply tilting an assignment, which was work on her shoulders, she shifted the focus to student feedback, student and course feedback, including early homework assignments that they had already undertaken. So she revised. It does connect to the original topic of her course, which is transparency. So her original focus on transparency, making clear assignments, making sure students understand the what and the why, the purpose. In doing that, she began to broaden her focus to other assignments, and she created a survey for students to fill out, and that became the primary activity in this course that emerged from her learning community. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. She followed the format that Denise suggested, the original assignment, the purpose of the assignment, what it constituted. And so because of COVID and a really, flexible, adept move, she created this survey, and here's what she learned. In her section on impact, she began to analyze what the students were telling her, and she said, I'm glad that I did this survey, and I'm not glad for COVID, but I'm glad that we shifted to the student perception of the assignments in the course early and late. And I have this part highlighted in the middle. It says, my students really appreciated the opportunity to evaluate and give me feedback about the effectiveness of an assignment. It leveled the playing field somewhat, engaging them to offer their instructor feedback during the class, as opposed to end of semester evaluations, which is more normal, more regular. It gave them an opportunity to be included, to exercise their agency as active learners. And then she talked about limitations. I don't think they quite understood the why of the assignment, which is kind of important in the TILT process. And then her conclusions. She incorporated the findings into modifying her course in the future. This was written back in June of past year, May of last year. So we don't have a follow-up to this particular report. But I guess the reason I chose this one out of the 208 reports that I've been looking at is that this is kind of like, you would think this would be like a worst case scenario. You had something you planned to do. You had the pedagogy, transparency in learning and teaching. And then COVID threw everything into question. And what she decided to do was to modify her approach, create the survey, expand the number of assignments that are being discussed, and apply the survey to address student perception of their clarity, their transparency, and their work within the course. Okay. So I think whatever the topic that you've decided, or if you're still adding to that particular topic, that flexibility, I mean, each of these 8 plus the 2 general topics for this year are so rich with possibilities. And what we're looking for at the system office in terms of final product is just the narrative of your work and your participants' work in this particular area or areas, and how that shaping of the product resulted. I think these findings are really fantastic. I'll stop there, Denise, with just one extended example.
So I guess, what questions do you all have?
Denise, I have a question. So I think a lot of our discussion centers around choosing an assignment, making changes to it, and seeing what kind of effect it has on students. And some of my participants are probably planning to look at some assignments, but then many of them are coming to the FLC just to learn more about inclusive pedagogies, for example, without having any specific assignment in mind. So to them, the goal is just to learn what inclusive pedagogy is and kind of create a background for themselves for the future that they can apply to perhaps multiple courses, but they don't have a really specific assignment in mind. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One of our examples, I think it's the first example in the toolkit, is a focus on an inclusive syllabus. So Tony Pearson from Gordon State. I'll go ahead and share this. I think I'm sharing the right one. Yes. So he talked about how he changed just the language in his syllabus to be more inclusive and welcoming. And so he talked about, what it was before. He refers to it as a 9-page monstrosity, where anything that could ever go wrong was in there so that he could say it's in the syllabus, right? Which is what we all kind of try and do. And then he looked at some of the language and just changed it in an attempt to make it more welcoming and more inclusive. So I think of this as a pretty powerful yet simple thing that could come out of conversations about, inclusivity and equity.
Yeah.
So that's just, one example that comes to my mind. Jeff, what do you think?
Of the 8 different general pedagogies that we have, some are more conducive to a ready application to a specific course, a specific assignment that can be modified. Others are more like, we have to reflect on that. Like, what does it mean to have an inclusive approach to the seminar course in English Lit? What does that mean? And so at my report, if I were facilitating discussion in inclusive pedagogy, it might be that at the end of the day, I would think, here are 8 or 10 practices, pedagogical practices that exist. At Emory, the 4 big categories, let's see, gosh, I shouldn't have even started this sentence, but so things like implicit bias, microaggressions, I'll stop there, those 2. So those kinds of topics open up lots of discussion on what these are. And so it is an opportunity to simply learn, what are these things? What do we mean by implicit bias? What is that? What lens do I use to see my students? So there's a lot of learning of terminology and practices, like taking the Harvard implicit bias test, taking a look at other work on cultural relevance, for example. So there could be a lot of reading and discussion on that. But still, at the end of the day, while it might not get down to the assignment level, it might be, I want to apply, as Tony Pearson said, this strategy in my blah, blah, blah course, whatever the specific course could be.
So can they, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So can they perhaps just do a self-reflection at the end, rather than focus on an assignment, just say, well, this is what inclusive pedagogy is for me now versus what it was in the beginning?
I mean, to me, I would say yes. I mean, I would have to think that somewhere in there's a change, right? There's a change in how, not just in here, but in we do something differently because of what we've learned. And I would hope that would come out somehow. But it might not be in an assignment. It could just be the way you think about how you call on people in class, or the attention you give to certain students, or yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different ways that these can come out in our teaching that is going to make a difference.
One concrete example for me in that memoir class that I referred to, one of the things that I did in the second semester after taking the implicit bias course through Emory College is I simply called on invited students to help me construct the syllabus. And so that's not a specific assignment, but we had a discussion. So, Dr. Galley had his 8-page syllabus, blah, 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 on the first day, but there were spaces that were blank, and I invited them to contribute articles, books, suggestions in the memoir category. And it ended up being a really active class, just that one thing. It wasn't specific to an assignment. It was more specific to the context of the course creation or syllabus creation.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Denise, there's a question in Will Rumbaugh asked about who does the report. Am I the only one who reports out, or does everyone in my FLC do a report? You want to handle that one, or do you want me to?
Sure. What we hope is that all of your participants will take this opportunity to reflect as well as you. So Jeff, what have you seen in terms of that in the report?
For almost all of them, the Chancellor's Learning Scholar writes the first page. And so the average length, I was thinking, maybe in your mind, you're thinking like, what does this have to be? A one-page summary? Is this going to be like a, is this going to be 100-page novelette? Most of these depend upon the number of participants, but for the most part, this Chancellor's Learning Scholar's voice is first, and he will provide context. This is how we began. This was our thinking. This is our final topic as we've moved through. So there's a pretty good summary of what it is, what it has been, what it was. And then in concise paragraphs, half single space pages, something like that, and some longer. The example that I gave, Margaret Pendergrass, that she was a facilitator and a participant. That Kennesaw did theirs in a unique way, but her 2 single space pages represented the voice of one person. And so they had 8 or so people, it ended up being a 10, 11-page report providing the frame and then those individual segments. There are others who ended up with, I will say that some really enthusiastically went into the writing of these. And there's, I'll just call out Molly Zhu, for example. Molly's in her first year, I want to say it was like 35 pages. So.
But you don't have to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to do that, yeah.
I mean, you kind of, if you have ever assigned reflective pieces to your students, you know that first of all, they're terribly bad at it. They will tell you what happened, but they won't think about why it happened or how and make those connections, which is why we have tried to give the guiding questions, because that is, at least with students, that makes a big difference if you give them guiding questions when they do reflections. So, it's easy to, I remember as a student sitting down to write reflections and sort of being grumpy about it because it seemed like, okay, now I will sit and reflect, but which did not seem genuine or authentic to me. But the more I've read about reflection, the more I realize that it often doesn't happen unless we force ourselves to sit down and do it, and particularly in writing, because that's how we really know what we think, and what we've learned is by writing about it.
Yeah, I'll add that most people will say, well, I didn't think a lot, I didn't do a lot, we met 3 times. But once they sit down to do that reflection, invariably people discover more actually went through their minds and their thought processes regarding their classes than they thought. These reflections, we have in the first year with 104 scholars, we had over 1,000 pages of reflection. And so like in the second year, it was similar to that. So we don't know what the third year will bring because of COVID, because we're doing all of this virtually. We're not able to sit down face to face at our meetings back in September and October. It seems like we're both aligned and in touch, but at the same time, we're not quite sure how we're touching everyone's minds and thoughts. So there may be a good surprise at the end of this. But in general, they're due when the learning community completes its work in the spring. And so I think the MOU says end of like April the 30th. We're trying to adjust for the financial offices at each institution because they do things slightly differently. And we want to be sure, A, that you're paid and reimbursed, okay? And so we set the due date earlier this year than in the second year. We had said end of May, and that provided some people a lot more time. And then it also provided challenges for some whose CBO offices, the business offices, wanted everything complete in March so that they could pay in the spring. So we're flexible. Denise and I think flexibility, we're kind of light on our feet, you know, even though I've gained a lot of extra pounds during the pandemic. So the idea is what works for you as the learning community comes to its conclusion at the end of the spring semester, whether that's end of March, end of April, that's a flexible target. The reports, we hope, are good reflections of the challenges that you faced. Like I was showing with the Pendergrass example, it may be pivots that you've had to undertake, but we really also want to hear the voices of the people, as few or as many as there have been in your communities. Some will be longtime buddies who were there at the beginning to help you think through what it was going to be. Others will be like intermittent attendees, you know, like we know that. And so just gather as much of those voices as you can, their reflections, because this is a beginning for many people to delve into. Margaret Pendergrass is a longtime faculty. She's brilliant. She's knowledgeable. She was studying tilt for the first time. So we don't know what the journey will be into inclusion, transparency, high impact practices. It just know we need to get into the conversation and then move forward.
Jeff, I see that Andrea has asked if there is a model for the full report. We don't have one up now. Is there one that you might be able to ask the participants? Like, is there one that you thought, wow, this whole report is amazing, and we'll ask the participants if we can share it?
I will absolutely do that. I'll select one. There are many really good reports, but as Denise said, I really should ask the people who authored that if it's okay that we share out. And I'm almost positive they'll say yes. But once they do, we can post it with Denise's magical touch. She'll know on our OFD pages. Is that where it's going to be?
Yeah, but I can send it out.
Send it out.
I'll let you guys. I'll let you all know that we have
Sure.
posted it once it's posted and where it'll be. What other questions do you have?
Topics still, so the resources page, I'll go back. I wanted to share screen and I'm clunky at sharing screen and stopping sharing and sharing another screen. So the OFD webinar series on the Office of Faculty Development pages are there in PDF, the summer webinars and the fall. I was visiting those this morning and I just really impressed with the expertise across the system. There's some really good archived and PDF materials there. Whatever your topic, I would just strongly encourage members, for your participants, to explore those for ideas going forward, whatever the topic that you selected. I may end up choosing more than one, Denise. Now I'm looking at some of the things that I've been reading. It might be like a couple, three. Maybe we can post different. Models are models. They're just ideas. They're not like, you know.
Yeah.
We're not. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will hang around. Maybe Jeff will hang around if any of you have questions. But thank you all for coming, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you all move along. Thanks, everyone.
Denise, I just